Welcome back to the show. Our next guest's latest book, The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. It's a groundbreaking investigation into the causes of illness, a critique of trauma in our society, and a pathway to health and to healing.
Here to talk about his revolutionary new novel, we have renowned speaker and best-selling author, Dr. Gabor Maté. Welcome to the show, Gabor. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for being here. All right, so the book is called The Myth of Normal. In what ways is normal a myth?
In medical language, when you talk about normal, you talk about the range in which health and life is possible, like a normal body temperature, blood acidity, blood pressure, beyond which life is impossible. We tend to assume in our society that the conditions that we're living under are actually normal. But what is the norm in our society is very unhealthy for a lot of people. So if you look at the rising tide of mental illness, the number of children being diagnosed with all kinds of conditions, the number of children being medicated, the number of adults with chronic illnesses is going up. The conditions in our society that we think are normal are actually unhealthy and unnatural and bad for us. So normality in this society is a myth. In medicine, normality means health. In this society, what is norm is actually unhealthy.
People throw around the word trauma a lot, and they say things like, oh, I just saw a movie that traumatized me. And you use the terms big T traumas and little t traumas. So what is the difference between the two for you?
Well, first of all, people go to a movie and they say I was traumatized. They weren't. They were just upset, you know? You can be upset and stressed without being traumatized. Trauma means wound. It's a Greek word for wounding. You can be psychologically wounded either by bad things happening, such as sexual, physical, emotional abuse, a parent dying, violence, addiction in the family. Those are what we call the big T traumas. The small T traumas are where kids are wounded, not because terrible things happen to them, but because their needs were not met. Children have certain needs without which they don't develop, they don't grow, they don't become healthy. They need to be picked up when they're crying. They need to be seen, heard, loved, accepted for who they are. A lot of families in a stressed society, kids are not hurt in the big T ways, but they're still hurt in the small T ways, and that leaves imprints on the body and the mind that cause illness later on in life.
You have said that one of the keys to healing, this is interesting. You say it begins with our birth practices. Now, following the line of your answer, your previous answer.
Before our birth practices.
Take us through, what does that mean? What does that look like?
So we already know that women during pregnancy who are stressed, their children are negatively affected by that stress. How their genes will function, how their hormones will function, how their brains will develop is affected by prenatal stress. We know this from multiple studies, and even decades later, you can trace the impact of stress on the mother on the child that was in the womb. Then we have our birth practices, which as a medical doctor, I was trained in a certain way of delivering babies. Very intrusive, very disrespectful of the natural process that happens. Now, as helpful, life-saving, and miraculous as our obstetrical inventions can be, when you have a nearly 40% cesarean section rate, we've taken medicalization way too far. And during birth, a natural cocktail of brain chemicals is supposed to be released in both the infant and the mother that help them bond. The more we mechanize birth, the more we medicalize it, the more we're interfering with the natural process, that's going to have an impact on the child and the mother's relationship. So intervention when necessary, but we've medicalized it and mechanized it to a far too great degree.
It's fascinating. You share this story in the book of, early on in the book, of a personal moment that you had. You were coming off a flight. It was a wonderful flight. You were in a great mood, and you landed, and you texted your wife, and you were like, she let you know that she wasn't going to be able to make it to pick you up. And suddenly your mood was entirely shifted, and you traced this story and your reaction to it with self-awareness, but you traced it back to your own childhood trauma.
Sure. So I arrived in Vancouver from a speaking trip, feeling really great, with a wonderful guy, and I get a text from my wife saying, I haven't left home yet, do you still want me to come? And immediately my mood switches from benign and positive to hostile and hurt. And when I go home, I'm barely even talking to her. Now, what is this all about? By the way, this was when I was young and stupid at age 71, so it wasn't that long ago. And What is this all about? It's not about the present moment. I mean, I'm not being an adult at the moment, but if you know that at 1 year of age or 11 months of age, I was given by my Jewish mother to a complete stranger, a Christian woman in the streets of Budapest, to save my life. And I didn't see her for 6 weeks. And when I saw her again, I wouldn't even look at her. That's the response of an infant separated from mother. And the infant's response is, I'll never open myself up again to being that vulnerable. 71 years later, that shows up because the memory, I don't recall that happening, by the way, but the memory of it, the emotional memory, sticks in the nervous system. And that's when we get triggered. And triggering means that some old wound, some old trauma gets activated in the present. And all of a sudden, I'm not a 71-year-old author and physician and husband. I'm reacting like a 1-year-old baby.
Wow.
So when people say to you, don't be such a baby, they're accurate.
Wow. All right, so we've seen a rise in addiction and suicides, especially among young people. So why do you believe that mental illness and addiction are normal responses to abnormal circumstances?
Well, I worked with addictions in Vancouver's downtown east side for 12 years. All of those people had been severely traumatized. It's not an accident that in this country, in the downtown east side of Vancouver, 30% of my clients were First Nations origin. They make up 5% of the population. It's not an accident that 50% of the women in this country in jail are First Nations origin. They make up 5% of the population because they were the most traumatized and hurt segment of the population. And addiction, drug use, or whether it's sex, gambling, or video games, or shopping or eating, is always an attempt to escape pain. It's a normal response to escaping pain. When people have a lot of pain, it's normal to want to escape. Addictions are one way to escape. In this society, we punish people for having been traumatized.
That's a deep statement. So how do we reconnect then with our authentic selves if we all have had some form of either big T, little t trauma, perhaps in our
Well,
life?
in this society, most people have, and usually what happens is that something occurs to recognize that we're paying a price. We get an illness, we get a mental health crisis, we have a breakup in our relationship, we have some kind of a crisis, and then we start asking, what happened to me, and why am I behaving in ways that are actually not good for me? So usually it has to begin with a waking up. Now there are steps you take afterwards, and we talk about them in the book, but it's got to begin with a recognition that how we've been living is not healthy for us.
Yeah, brilliant conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Maté. So informative. The Myth of Normal is on sale now, so make sure you pick up a copy. But good news, audience, you're all going home with one today. Yes, great stuff.
Hey there, wasn't that great? Do you know where you can find some equally good content? Our YouTube page. It's filled with discussions, debates, and some laughs. Head there now, like and subscribe.